Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Lohmann. I've been in tourism research for decades, since the 80s of last century, actually. And today I have been asked to report on how tourism demand respond to crisis. Can we have the presentation, please? There it is. This is a basic question. There's a crisis, and what is the tourist behavior later? We live in difficult, disturbing times, especially with the most recent crisis, the war in Ukraine. And you may ask, can we still talk about tourism? And my answer is yes, we can. We have to. It's our business. And the customer value of tourism is so manifold, with a lot of positive effects, that we have to talk about tourism. It does a lot of good. People need holidays to find relaxation and new perspectives. Now the question is, how does a crisis affect this tourist behavior? We take Germany as an example because that's the only source market where we have data for more than 5 decades. We have a survey there called Reisen, which we do each and every year since the early 1970s. My personal history started with the Cernobyl disaster back in 1986. And in 1986, we were really shocked about what was going on there in the Ukraine. And we thought that tourism would be totally different after this incident. We expected a lot of destination changing and things like that. But at the end of the year, we figured out that behavior changes were on a minor scale, not with destination choice, but just with like not laying down alpine meadows or something like that. So on a low level. In fact, since 1955, which is on the list here, we had a lot of crises. Each and every year there was one. So the normal situation is that we have tourism with a crisis and not tourism without crisis. When we look at travel participation in Germany from 1955 to last year, this is a diagram showing how many people took at least one holiday in a year. And we look at the list of crises. We see that there is not much of a relation with the overall travel demand and the year of a crisis. The same goes on a global level with the data from UNWTO. Again, we see there's no real big relation with the crisis we had and the developing of travel behavior. Normally, during a crisis, this comes as a surprise. Always people are surprised that such a big event does not have a big impact on travel demand. That has to do with our, focus of awareness. Some people call it inattention and blindness. We look at one big event and we are really impressed, and we ignore other things happening at the same time. We call this the focus of awareness problem. Now, which lessons have we learned? They come on 2 levels. One is a functional model, the pathways of the crisis, how does they impact, and then the database experiences of war, terrorism, and pandemic in the past. And here comes the functional model. On the right, you see the tourist behavior. On the left, the crisis, which might be a pandemic, a disaster, terror or war or whatever. And this crisis has 3 pathways. One is to the persons, the potential tourist demand, then to the general framework conditions. We've learned about that during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the frameworks changed and travel was no more possible. And of course, the 3rd pathway is through the tourism industry, the destinations to tourist behavior. The tourism system is not only influenced by a crisis, of course. There are so many factors affecting tourist behavior, like economy, technology, climate change, politics, society, work conditions, and so on, that the power of a single factor normally is rather limited. Secondly, we have the persons. When there is a crisis, even if you are not affected personally, normally we have compassion, we have fears, we have emotions, we have undertake actions to support people which have problems. We have sort of a panic, and we normally stick to conservative behavior. We take our strategies that are tried and tested earlier. It's not the time for innovation. For instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic, people stayed in their home countries during holidays, but even in their home country, they took destinations where they have been before. Another point is the orientation with others and authorities. So we look to others. And the next aspect is the personal relevance. Most crises in the past have not been of big relevance for the tourists. When you're spending your holidays in the Black Forest, a terror attack in Turkey is not very relevant for you. So impacts of crisis are mainly manifested regionally in the affected destination or in the affected source market. So we have two levels where the crisis can hit tourist behavior. The first level factors is ability and motivation to travel, which reflects the source market. The second level is adaptive behavior. Where do I travel to? How do I travel? And what to do? And this refers to the destinations and the possibilities to reach a destination. A destination is well characterized by its attractiveness, its amenities, and its accessibility. And all these three A's must be present, and crisis may affect one of these A's. I give you some examples of the second level adaptation of tourists. We had a war in former Yugoslavia from 1991 to 2001, and you see here that the share of German holiday trips to former Yugoslavia dropped tremendously and didn't come up until the mid of last decade. Nowadays, Croatia is one of the most important foreign destinations of Germans. This shows the impact of the terror attacks in Turkey in 2016. Everybody was shocked. You can't travel to Turkey anymore, but, well, we had a limited effect. The market share goes down about 1/3. And it came up again in 2019, and then we have a second effect of COVID-19, which affected travel to Turkey in 2020 and 2021. The level of trips to the Mediterranean remains the same. So when not traveling to Turkey, people travel to other destinations around the Mediterranean. And lastly, we come to the COVID-19 pandemic. You see here that in 2020 and 2021, German holiday demand decreased tremendously. And that was due to that the basic conditions for travel were partly not given and the high personal relevance in the source market. We adapted in holiday behavior to the restrictions. So we choose other destinations, other accommodations, other ways of the means of transportation. What remained the same was the high regard for travel and our chosen preferences for the future. This is true resilience, to adapt during a crisis and then coming back to your previous behavior. So what we have learned about how does tourism demand respond to crisis is, first, we do not know the future. But that does not mean that all possible developments are equally likely. We've learned a lot already. We have learned from previous crises that in tourism, the typical customer response pattern is behave, adapt, and keep longing for travel and your wanderlust. Vacation travel for the benefit of travelers and their hosts will be important in the future as well. Perhaps tourism can contribute even to peace in the world. Thank you very much for your attention.